I've always loved being alone in the woods. It's a break from the world, just me, nature, and long stretches of quiet. That weekend, I packed my gear into the back of my car and set off early in the morning. My plan was simple: hike to a remote spot, set up camp, and spend a few days hunting. When I arrived, I was relieved to find the place almost deserted. The parking lot near the trailhead was small, and there wasn't a single car in sight. Perfect. The hike was peaceful. I found a good spot near a small creek, pitched my tent, and by afternoon, I had a small campfire going. After a quick meal, I grabbed my rifle and set off deeper into the forest. At first, the hike was uneventful. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves beneath my boots and the occasional rustle of squirrels darting through the underbrush. But then, something caught my eye. A figure, just a flicker of movement between the trees. He was far away, slipping in and out of sight between the thick branches. My first thought was another hunter, but he wasn't on any marked trail. He was weaving through the dense brush, moving quickly, almost too quickly. I considered calling out, just basic safety protocol to let him know I was there, but something about the way he moved made me uneasy. He wasn't just walking, he was sneaking. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. I shook it off, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe just another camper exploring off-trail. Maybe just my imagination. But the unease lingered. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees. I hadn't had any luck hunting that day, so I trudged back to my campsite, my rifle slung over my shoulder. The forest was too quiet, not a breeze, not a single bird chirping. Sometimes the woods settle into an eerie silence, but this felt different, like the trees were holding their breath. I forced myself to shake off the feeling. It was just my imagination, I told myself. I ate a quick dinner by the campfire, then ducked into my tent, zipping it up tight. I lay on my sleeping bag, listening to the distant crackling of the dying fire outside. Then, in the dead of night, I woke up with a jolt. A sharp, echoing crack split the silence. A gunshot. Then another. My pulse raced. It wasn't unusual to hear gunfire in hunting areas, but this was well after dark. No one was supposed to be shooting out here at this hour. I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was just someone scaring off a wild animal. Maybe an accident. But then, soft footsteps, right outside my tent. My heart pounded so hard I was sure they could hear it. Then, a voice. A whisper. "Should we check inside?" Another voice answered, too quiet for me to make out the words. I stopped breathing. Check inside? My mind raced. Were they talking about my tent? I stayed as still as possible, barely daring to blink. My fingers curled around my hunting knife, but I didn't move. Then, after a long pause, one of them muttered, "Not now. Let's go." The footsteps faded into the darkness. I lay there for what felt like hours, straining to hear any sign of them returning. But the night had gone silent again. I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't staying there until morning. I lay there in the suffocating silence, heart hammering in my chest. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to move, to run. But I forced myself to wait. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. I couldn't be sure. Finally, I decided I couldn't risk staying any longer. Moving as quietly as I could, I reached for my bag, only taking the essentials: my phone, car keys, and my rifle. Anything else could be replaced. I unzipped the tent inch by inch, wincing at every tiny sound. Then I stepped out into the cold night air. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. The trees loomed like silent sentinels around me. I listened. Nothing. Swallowing hard, I started walking. Every step felt agonizingly slow. My boots crunched on fallen leaves, and each time I stopped, convinced someone would hear me. The walk back to my car felt endless. Somewhere in the darkness, a twig snapped. I froze, The feeling of being watched crawled over me like icy fingers. I quickened my pace. Then, finally, I saw my car. I practically threw myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking as I jammed the key into the ignition. Headlights flooded the empty parking lot. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. I didn't look back. I just drove. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. I had driven for nearly an hour, but exhaustion was catching up with me. My eyes burned. My hands ached from gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I needed to stop. Then, up ahead, I spotted it. A flickering neon sign. Motel vacancy. It wasn't much, but I didn't care. I just needed to be somewhere with walls and other people around. I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot. Only 2 other cars were parked outside. The place looked run down. Peeling paint, a buzzing neon sign, and dim lights casting eerie shadows. Inside, the woman at the front desk barely looked up from her phone as she handed me the key. Room 104. The hallway smelled musty, like old carpets and mildew. My shoes made no sound on the worn floor. When I stepped into the room, I was met with dim, flickering light and a stale odor. The carpet had dark stains, the bedspread was stiff and old, and the air conditioner rattled as it hummed. But it was better than the woods. I dropped my bag onto the chair and collapsed onto the bed. I told myself I just needed a few hours of sleep. But somewhere deep inside, I knew something still wasn't right. I wasn't sure what time it was when I woke up. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. A soft, scraping sound outside my window. Then a light tap. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I turned my head slowly, staring at the thin curtain covering the window. The dim security light outside cast a faint glow against the fabric, and in that glow I saw a shadow, tall, still, watching. Another tap, then a knock at the door. My stomach lurched. I forced my voice to stay steady. "Who is it?" A pause. Then a man's voice, quiet and calm. "I need to talk to you about the forest incident." My blood ran cold. The forest incident? No way this was a coincidence. My hands trembled as I slid the chain lock into place. I took a step back and reached for my phone. The voice spoke again. "I just need to settle something." His tone was polite. Too polite, which made it so much worse. I didn't wait. I dialed 911. "There's a man outside my door," I whispered. "He says he needs to talk to me about something that happened in the woods." The dispatcher's voice was calm. "Stay inside. Officers are on the way." I stood there, phone clutched in my shaking hands. Then, silence. No more knocking. No more whispers. When the police arrived, there was no one there. The flashing red and blue lights flooded the motel parking lot as 2 officers stepped out of their cruiser. I opened the door cautiously, my heart still pounding. "He was right here," I said, voice shaky. "I saw him through the curtain. He knocked, said he needed to talk about what happened in the woods." The officers exchanged glances. One of them, a stocky man with a tired expression, nodded. "All right, sir. Let's take a look." They swept the area with their flashlights, checking behind the motel, around the lot, even near the trees at the edge of the property. Nothing. They asked the woman at the front desk to check the security cameras, but of course, the system was broken. One of the officers took my statement while the other continued searching. "Are you sure it wasn't a prank? Maybe just someone messing around?" I shook my head. He knew about the forest, about the gunshots. The officer's face was unreadable. "We'll keep patrolling the area," he said eventually. "Lock your door. Call us if anything else happens." And just like that, they left. I was alone again, wide awake, waiting for the sun to rise. The first rays of sunlight bled across the sky as I threw my bag into the back seat of my car. I wasn't staying here another second. I checked out quickly, barely glancing at the receptionist. who didn't even bother to ask if everything was okay. As I pulled onto the road, my thoughts swirled in confusion. Who was that man? Was he the same shadow I saw in the woods? Had he followed me all the way here? Or worse, had he been watching me long before that? I gripped the wheel tighter. I didn't have answers. I only had fear.